Imagine being locked in a basement for months, undergoing the most unimaginable things you could ever think of, and then when the police arrive, they just leave you there to die. Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be looking into the case of Marc Dutroux. Now, this case is extremely disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. Honestly, you cannot believe that this actually happened. As always, if you haven't, make sure you smash that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, and drop down in the comments below which case you want to cover next. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Marc Dutroux was born on November the 6th, 1956. Born in Brussels in Belgium, and this case shook the entirety of Belgium back when this happened. Now, his early life was somewhat unremarkable. So he came from a pretty broken home. His parents were actually both teachers, but this marriage ended in a pretty bad divorce while he was a young boy. His mother gained custody of him, he didn't really see his dad, and grew up in this small region in Brussels. Now, in Marc's teenage years is when things started to get a little bit weirder. He began displaying very troubling behaviour. He became involved in petty crime, theft, robberies, all kinds of things. And it's clear from an early age he had a little regard of the law and just didn't really care. However, what would follow in the coming years was worse than anybody could ever imagine. Dutroux's criminal behaviour escalated in the 1980s when he started committing much more serious acts. His first known extremely serious crime came in 1985 when he was arrested for the abduction and of 5 young girls, and these crimes would later foreshadow the horrific actions that came in the 1990s. In 1989, Marc was convicted and sentenced for these crimes and got 13 years in prison. 13 years! For doing that to 5 people. What is the system, man? But it gets worse than that, because due to a failure in the Belgian prison system, he was released after 3 years. Oh my god. It was believed that at this time he had been rehabilitated and ready to just go back into normal life and was absolutely fine now. But they were completely wrong. After his release, Dutroux began preparing for his new spree of crimes. And although he'd done these terrible things to these people, they obviously got out. They told the authorities and it got him arrested. So his new plan: not leave anyone alive. In the early 1990s, he then had his accomplice, his wife, Michelle Martin. They purchased several properties in Chenoli, and these properties would later become the scenes of unspeakable acts. On June 24th, 1994, 2 young girls, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, both aged 8, disappeared. They'd been walking nearby their homes in Grace Hollow when they were taken by these people. Unknown, of course, at the time, but they had been taken by Marc Dutroux and his wife and held in this dungeon in his basement in one of these properties. Now, what Dutroux had done is created a soundproof chamber in his basement, essentially, where he would keep people and do unthinkable things that I can't even speak about, but I think you can probably imagine. Despite all of the cries for help, no one could hear, of course. Now, only 2 months after these 2 were taken, Marc struck again. On August 22nd, 1995, 2 teenage girls, Anne Markle and FJ Lambrechts, disappeared while on holiday in Ostend. However, unlike the other 2, very shortly after taking these 2 girls, they were unalived. By this time, the disappearance of all of these young people had caught nationwide attention, and the whole of Belgium was going crazy because people were just randomly vanishing. Like, what is going on? There was massive searches trying to find these people, but there was nothing ever found. But what no one could be prepared for is that the man who was committing all these crimes was already right on the top of the police radar. Now, this is where it just gets absolutely mental. His own mother had reported him to the police and literally told them that he was doing these things, and they did nothing. But not long after this, Marc was actually arrested for something completely separate. He was arrested for stealing a car. And after loads of people were saying random bits about him, the police eventually went round to the house and went to check it out. Now, while Marc was in prison for stealing the car, he told his wife that she would have to keep the 2 current girls in the basement alive by feeding and watering them. Like, what? So these 2 people were in the basement when the police came round. He even got close to the basement and was looking around every different area in the house. They didn't hear a thing. They didn't see anybody. And they left. The 2 young girls then tragically passed away, of course. And when Marc was released from a few months' sentence for stealing the car, his wife told him that she didn't go down and feed them or anything because she was too scared to go down there alone. Now, May 28th, 1996, he abducted 2 more people. However, luckily, these 2 actually managed to survive. Now, it wasn't until August 1996 where this all takes a turn. They finally arrested him. The breakthrough came when a police informant had actually tipped everybody off, providing key information that linked Marc to all of these abductions. And when police raided the property, they found the last two girls, Sabrina and Letitia, in the basement alive and managed to save them, but the other two were found unalived, of course, tragically. So what he was doing was basically using each of these properties that he had as separate dungeons, which is mental. So this whole city was just turned into, like, whatever you want to call it. Like, you can't fathom it. It's crazy. You just have two people or one or two people in each of these different basements, do what he wants and just leave them there. Now, following his arrest, Marc was charged with multiple counts of abduction, murder, the list goes on. The details of the crimes as they emerged were almost too graphic to even describe, and people in court were like, what the hell? And Detroit eventually was found out not to just be committing all of this stuff that we know about, but was also involved in human traffic rings, and it was alleged that he had actually started this whole thing basically as a large operation to basically get these people and do you know what, basically supplying to wealthy and powerful people. After the arrest, this case caused outrage in the whole of Belgium and worldwide to where this case is today. There was of course many theories around this as well, believing that Detroit was actually part of a much more powerful network, if he was involved in this traffic stuff and supplying to rich people and that he was actually perhaps protected by government high rankings to basically cover up what he was doing, which could be true. Many people believe this still because obviously he went on for so long doing this, while many people reported him, they did nothing. People went to the house, they did nothing. Many people vanishing, he was a known criminal doing that in the area, they did nothing. So all of this just put fuel on the flames and let people believe that's what was happening. Now, the trial of Marc Dutroux finally took place in 2004, almost a decade after his initial crimes. Now, during the trial, he admitted most of the charges but also denied some of them, also blaming a lot of it on other people, including his own wife. But apparently he also had two other accomplices. Now, they were also put on trial for this whole case at the same time. Detroit was ultimately found guilty on all of these things and was sentenced to life imprisonment. His wife, Michelle Martin, was also sentenced for aiding and abetting the crimes that obviously were committed. She was sentenced to 30 years in jail, however was actually released back in 2012 on parole after serving literally not even half a sentence.
On a summer Sunday afternoon, they gathered as one, united in their opposition to the decision to release Michel Martin. On the stage, the father of one of Dutroux's young victims. His family, he says, is now a victim of Belgium's judicial system.
Now, the other accomplices, Michael Lelevy, he was sentenced to 25 years in jail and was released on parole in 2019, and apparently was actually a very high-ranking businessman who was much more involved in the wider network in many other crimes and received another 5-year prison sentence. Now, today, Marc Dutroux remains in prison serving his life sentence. Back in 2019, he applied for parole due to citing old age and many health issues, but his request was denied. The story is absolutely shocking, and you can't believe that this stuff actually happened and happens, and there really are some sick people in the world.